Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are joining from. On behalf of ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund team, I would like to thank everyone for joining today's session for an enlightening discussion on how smart city solutions can encourage meaningful civics participation that will enable cities to shift to a more user-centric urban planning methodology to create truly smart and livable cities. This webinar is organized with the Australian government's Department of Foreign Affairs and the Asian Development Bank. We have a very interactive session this afternoon with a lineup of interesting presenters. So we want to get started. And we will get started with some brief opening remarks from the Australian Consul General in Makassar, Indonesia, Ms. Bronwyn Robbins. Ms. Robbins is a career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and was most recently Director, Southeast Asia Development Section. She has previously served overseas in Jakarta, Colombo, Bangkok, and Pretoria. So without further ado, over to you, Ms. Robbins, for a proper opening.
Thank you very much. Before I begin my remarks, I would like to acknowledge our presenters today. Marit Kahilu, CEO and co-founder of Mapitionier, Ahmad Rifai, Executive Director and co-founder of Kita Kota, Mark Thomas, Managing Director and founder of ServiceWorks, Christelle Lahoud, Program Management Officer of UN Habitat, our moderator from the Asian Development Bank, Sunghoon Krismoon, as well as the whole ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund team. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund webinar on using digital tools for enhanced community engagement in urban planning. The Government of Australia, through its Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, committed to contribute $20 million towards the fund, which focuses on building livable cities that are green, competitive, inclusive, and resilient. The establishment of AASCTF was announced by former Prime Minister Turnbull at the ASEAN Australia Special Summit in March 2018. This program aims to improve core functional areas: planning systems, service delivery, and financial management of participating ASEAN cities, including Makassar, where I am based, through adaptation of appropriate digital solutions. Australia has long been a leader in smart cities technologies, and it's only fitting that we should work with our ASEAN colleagues to build a better future together. I'm especially thrilled to be participating in today's event, as I was part of the team that designed this program in Australia and in Manila. As urbanisation grows rapidly in Southeast Asia, our cities need to be better planned and prepared for the future. And this is where digital technologies can play a key role. One of the benefits of using digital technologies in smart cities planning is improved climate resilience. And Australia is very proud that our national science agency, the CSIRO, has co-designed a climate data resilience platform, which will be invaluable in the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities program. Another key benefit, and what we're here to learn about today, is the way in which digital technologies can be used to ensure a participatory, socially inclusive, and data-driven city planning process. The use of digital technologies opens up doors for city governments to engage with their citizens in a meaningful way to collect valuable feedback, insights, and data from a broad scope of community stakeholders. Digital technologies can break down physical barriers to ensure that engagement is not only with select demographics, but also incorporates the voices of women and girls, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable and marginalised populations. By using digital technologies to engage with those groups who are often left out of planning processes, city governments are better equipped to ensure they do not overlook vital social considerations and instead engage in people-centric urban planning to create truly smart and livable cities. I hope you all enjoy this webinar today and continue to learn and to share new and innovative ways to plan inclusive smart cities. I now have pleasure in handing over to our presenters to tell us about the ways in which digital technologies that they have designed can be used to enhance community engagement in urban planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robbins, for that very proper opening. Yes, as you have mentioned, I think you really kind of just presented what we are going to be talking about in this webinar series today. Now, with that, we have 4 audience polls this afternoon, and we will be taking these polls between the presentations. Now, let me introduce you to the first poll before we begin the first presentation. So the question is, how well do you think your local city government is engaging its citizens in urban planning? Extremely well, very well, fairly well, not well at all, not applicable to my knowledge. No community engagement is used for city planning. So we'll give you 5 minutes starting now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I hope you're done. We'll have the results. Okay, so this is our reality, not well at all in terms of local city government engaging its citizens in urban planning. With this, perhaps we can find out where we are on this. So let's conclude this first poll, and we will move on to the first presentation. So thanks to everyone who responded to our first audience poll. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Marit Kahila, who is the CEO of Mapita Oy, the company behind Maptionaire. Maptionaire is a map-based community engagement tool that bridges the gap between the community and planners through map-based questionnaires that collect GIS-based data. So today, Marit will share Maptionaire's approach to building cities through community engagement. So the floor is yours, Marit.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Happy to be here today. So as mentioned, my name is Marit Kahila, and I come from the company called Mapita, which is behind our service called Maptionaire. Originally, we are a spin-off company from the university, Aalto University from Helsinki, Finland. Our company is also located in Helsinki. And we have been interested throughout the years. Mapita turns this year 10 years. We have been interested how we can capture people's experiences of their local environment and then involve that knowledge into the making of the cities. I have also my other foot in the academia, as I have been publishing quite a lot of research articles from this topic. And also in my thesis, I studied how PPGIS tools, public participatory GIS tools, can support urban planning in their work, urban planners in their work. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, although we are living in a very digital world, this is still how community engagement looks like. So in reality, and of course this is before the COVID situation, but still we are very much into organizing workshops and public gatherings to meet people face to face. And what is the challenge in these events is that we gather and we are able to reach only few people, and quite often we even know who will come to the events. And it's not everyone in the events who are able to have their say. And then the data looks often like this. We have a lot of post-it stickers that are then very hard to transfer further. So these are the challenges we have wanted to tackle when designing Maptioner. Okay, next slide. And it's still a wonder to us that why we keep doing community engagement, public participation like that. As mentioned, although the world is very digital, when we wake up, we have first in our hands our mobile phone, and we also expect the, the apps and different kinds of digital tools to work very fluently. Also, when we think of our world today, things like collaboration, community engagement, and themes like that are getting more and more of importance in our making. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So, and what is still a very big challenge is that we don't reach people broadly enough. As already mentioned, we are able to reach only a few of people, but also when thinking our age groups, we don't get everyone involved. And this is exactly what has been very important for us. We talk about broad participation and how to sort of involve people very broadly throughout different age groups. And this is, of course, challenging when you are designing digital tools, that how to make it so attractive that everyone wants to participate. Have to say, we have been quite successful in this. Let's go further. And especially when we think of urban planning, this is how it usually has been. So the challenge, especially in Finland, but also in other countries, has been that we arrange the communication rather late in the process. So we tend to involve people after we have already the proposals ready. So we don't involve the people from the very early phases of the planning process. And this was actually one of the key findings in my dissertation, that I found out that planners really wanted to use the tool as Maptioner during the early phases of the process. So this tells that they didn't have the correct tools for these type of situations. Okay, next slide. So all in all, what we have been interested to design throughout the years is a kind of digital heart that brings together different kinds of digital community engagement tools. Let's go further. And there are three important aspects we have highlighted when designing the tools. So firstly, the interaction between the citizen and the city needs to be super fluent and smooth. That's why we are not creating any sort of separate apps. All our technology is browser-based. Okay, next slide. And then we put a lot of attention how we capture the data and how to put that into that type of format that it's very then useful for the urban planners to use as part of their work. So this maybe tells something about our research sort of mindset, but what we really care of capturing good quality data. Yes, next slide. And at the end, everything needs to be super fun and easy and smooth, as people don't have much time and they don't want to put a lot of time into this type of work. So everything needs to work very easily. Next slide. And on this slide, you can just see, I'm not going to go into the details what Maptioner is today. So if you are interested of that, you can contact me. But this tells you the idea of Maptioner and the different modules inside Maptioner. So it's a modular-based service and SaaS service, everything working online. And it includes different types of tools, and as part of the tools are really to support communication with the people, and some tools are for gathering the data from the people in different phases of the planning process. And then we have these 3D modules and so forth available. Next slide. Happy to say that Maptioner is not an idea or innovation in the early phases. We have done this work many years, and we have customers and people using Maptioner throughout the world. at the moment in over 35 countries, and there is now nearly 10,000 projects done with Maptionnaire. Okay, let's go further. I need to hurry a bit. And then some case studies, one from Singapore, where the researchers and citizens together, they designed the waterfront in Singapore. And this was interesting study because they then found out that the public and the people really want to have very accessible waterfront, green spaces, and so forth. So they found interesting results through the study to support the making of the waterfront. Next slide. And this case study comes from Australia, where the Sydney Institute of Marine Science wanted to study how to establish more ecological harbour areas. And they gathered sort of information from the people about the polluted harbours, and then also about the places where people see they could support ecological engineering to happen in the harbour area. So they kind of crowdsourced the ideas to make the harbour areas more ecological. Next slide. This is my third case study example, also coming from Singapore, though we have worked in many countries, for example, in Asia, but this is also from Singapore, and it's still an ongoing study by Dr. Belinda Yuan from the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities. And this is interesting study, as here they are studying elderly people and the elderly people's neighborhoods, and also especially concentrating on the walkability matters. Okay, next slide. So there are many different kinds of sort of returns we can consider when using the tools like Maptionnaire: societal, economic, and environmental returns. Now I don't have time to go into the details of this. I need to thank you, everyone. We can move to the last slide. I need to give room to the next speaker. Thank you all for listening. Bye.
Thank you very much, Marie. I think it really gives us an incentive to go study farther into the cases that you have presented. Now, as I said, we have the second question poll that will come up for us before we move on to the next presentation. Okay. Do we have the poll on? Excellent. So the question is, how well do you think smart digital solutions can improve civic participation in cities? Extremely well, very well, fairly well, not well at all, or it's not applicable? Again, 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do we have the result? Okay, so I think we have a good trust of digital solutions that in improving civil participation in cities. So let's move on to the second presentation. Perhaps Ahmed Rifai will give us a little bit more inkling in terms of how this can be done. So our next speaker is Ahmed Rifai, who is the executive director and co-founder of Kita Kota. Kita Kota is a nonprofit organization based in the Indonesian city of Solo with expertise in urban planning and citizen participation in the design and development of cities. Ahmed will discuss their experience in participatory urban mapping for better urban planning. So over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Chris, for the time. So I would be quite straight. So my presentation's title is Participatory Urban Mapping for Better Urban Planning, because our main focus, especially Kota Kita in Indonesia, in the early stage of its establishment, actually how we bridge the process of urban development between stakeholders, especially in using data in helping urban planning processes in Indonesian city. So our first initiative, for example, inspired by the UN Habitat Urban Observatory project at the first time, and we implemented in Solo, and we conducted a citywide mapping that allowing people in the grassroots to be able to participate in the process of participatory budgeting and urban planning in the city. Next slide, please. So just to give a context of why we are doing that, and until now we are still kind of promoting participatory urban data collection and urban mapping, because in Indonesia, especially in many Indonesian cities and in mid-sized city, especially not a big city like Jakarta, for example, there are conditions where data, we lack of fine-grained data in Indonesian city to inform urban development planning. What I mean by fine-grained is that there are many kind of data collection process in the city in the forms of like a tabular data and then Excel sheet data, but it's not really mapped and then distributed kind of very good in a certain kind of map-based kind of information, especially in relating to kind of different territory in the neighborhood level. So, for example, and also community usually very difficult to access that data at the city level. We found as well in Indonesian city that elite capture still apparently kind of quite happening as well, where information are usually dominated by certain elite and use this information to influence the process of urban planning and urban development for just their vested interest. So say, for example, in many development planning and development kind of discussion process, people are not that well informed. So only certain people are using that information to kind of propose particular project or particular development project in the city level. Just next slide, please. I think this is the context that I would like to give you, an information about Indonesian city. Usually in Indonesia, we have what we call as RT level block. That's in this is example in Solo City. The map is showing is a Solo City. So the block level is a very crucial in Indonesia, because by using this block level boundaries, actually we can collect and gather a lot of meaningful data that can inform the process of urban development planning in Indonesian city. But it's never been utilized before by Indonesian cities. So Kota Kita really tried to kind of help to collect as many as possible that kind of data from this block level, because once we collect this, we can use this information to kind of address issues in each of the territory, especially in the neighborhood level. In the beginning of 2010, say for example, because technology hasn't really not advanced yet in Indonesian city, so we really encourage the RT leader to use SMS to send us the data. And then we map the city kind of data at a very fast kind of process, because with that SMS gateway, we can help them to kind of collect the data in a pretty kind of fast kind of mode process at that time. So this is an example of how we map a Solo City with 2,700 RT block leader helping us in collect the data in the community level. Next slide, please. This is the tool that then we created to use to help the process of participatory budgeting in the city. So by digitizing the data into GIS, we then create a tools by the help of UN Habitat Urban Observatory at that time. We create a map, a mini atlas that contextualize the information that we collect, and then help the community to discuss, provoke the discussion in the community level when they're discussing participatory budgeting. So project that proposed by community can align to particular issue that we map, because this is the reality. This is not something that the elite want to do, but we talk about what the fact and the community can do. So this is an example of a tool that we created at the time. Next. Another model that then we develop these models of mapping, urban mapping in different sector in Indonesian city. We work in many cities in Indonesia, in Makassar, in Banjarmasin, in Solo, and some other cities in Indonesia. So we use this kind of mapping tool to also collect different information. This is an example of how we then also survey the distributions of creative kampung in Indonesia. So usually in slum area, in a low income community, a livelihood, it's pretty kind of unique because there is a process of agglomerations of livelihood, type of livelihood. So people usually start copycat and then created some kind of, group of like, cluster or economic cluster, and then we map that kind of distribution in many urban slum in Solo. So that we know the distribution of this creative kampung. We call it creative kampung because this process actually related to many creative design process that we want to understand the situation and help the city and the community to better address the issue that they face. Next. Another example, next slide, please. Another example, this is the result of the process of the mapping. So you can see the distribution of economic cluster in Greater Solo. Thousands of groups of community actually create this cluster, and we produce the document as well that we submit to the government and also being used by other actors to help them to plan the intervention. Next, please. This is another example of the mapping where we help UNESCO to help map the distributions and the location of persons with disabilities in two cities, which is Solo and Banjarmasin. So by using technology and apps, at that time we use Kobo Collect, where we help. It helped us to kind of identify using a particular survey method where we help and reach out thousands of persons with disability and then geolocate their location so the government can better can better plan what they want to do with the kind of intervention. For example, in the current COVID-19, the distribution of COVID kind of social assistance, we use this data that we produce as well in two cities. Next. Next slide, please. So this is the final result of the process of the mapping of Solo disability mapping. We map around 1,167 persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is also the result, the distribution in Banjarmasin. So you can see how it's being mapped as well in the city. Next, I have a very limited time. Thank you very much. I hope we can discuss further the experience, but that's a pretty kind of a little contribution from Kota Kita Foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. This is quite fascinating. It's a good marriage of grassroots involvement in many inclusive ways, as well as, how we utilize part of what we know through digital technology. So thank you. So now we will introduce the third audience poll. Do we have the poll open? No? Okay, so here we go. What do you think is the main challenge for making community engagement more digital in cities? Lack of community access to digital tools, lack of community interest in contributing to the planning process, social and cultural barriers for using digital tools in community, lack of city planners' skills and understanding on using digital tools, lack of city planners' skills and understanding on using digital tools. Oh, it's the same thing. Traditional thinking around participatory community engagement being physical. So 5 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see the results. Okay, so lack of community access to digital tools, but I think there is a widespread of responses here on this. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for participating, everyone. And now we will move on to the next presentation by Mark Thomas. Mr. Mark Thomas is the Managing Director and founder of ServiceWorks. ServiceWorks is an international smart cities enterprise providing strategic counsel and smart tools to solve urban challenges. Mark will discuss his experience in encouraging citizen participation, as well as some tools that they have used towards this end. So let's welcome Mark. Mark?
Thank you very much for the introduction. And so I come to you based in New Zealand, but we work principally in Asia and also in Australia. And my approach is to talk about some of the specific tools that we've been using to actually let citizens feel more engaged. And so I think you'll see it's quite a different approach to the fascinating discussions we've had led by Marit and Ahmad. And I think the context for my discussion also is that very interesting last poll we had with all of those different answers. And really we were kind of split, weren't we, in terms of our views. That shows the challenge, doesn't it, in terms of getting community engagement right. And it also shows that there's a range of different practices and tools that will be needed. I had 6 years experience as a local elected councillor in Auckland, and so have first-hand experience of the challenges that Marie did such a good job of describing. So let's then start with the next slide and understand firstly, what are the roadblocks to better digital engagement? And some of these roadblocks are big themes, which in fact are impacting smart cities generally, but also they're impacting the success and effectiveness of community engagement in areas such as urban planning. So we have concerns about which technology to adopt. We have always funding challenges. Civic leadership, sometimes our leadership is not as engaged with digital technology as we'd want them to be. We have challenges making decisions within cities, still too much of a silo approach, whereas of course our digital technologies are trying to break down silos. And we have skeptical citizens who in some cases aren't so familiar with the technology, or in some cases are disillusioned with the cities. So that's a context for the challenges. Next slide, please. But with all those challenges, we have new hope taking place. And so what I want to talk to you here is just 3 examples of some tools that some cities have used to get cities more engaged. In Vancouver, in Canada on the West Coast, they have Van Connect, and there may well be cities you're familiar with that have a similar sort of tool. It's an app that the city provides, which gives citizens the opportunity to report issues that they see in their street. Dumped rubbish, maybe a burst water main, maybe some pothole that the transit authority hasn't taken care of. They can take a picture of that, they can send it through to the city, and they can stay attached to see what the outcome is. Anteno is another app, similar version. What that allows citizens to do is to connect themselves into the information flows within cities. And so they can know if a building consent is applied for in their street. They can know if someone's made an event permit request to have an event. So that's a way in which people can get engaged with what's happening in the city too. In a more creative sense, at the bottom, we have the Catch the King Storm Sense app, which ran in Virginia in the United States. And here they use crowdsourcing as a way of providing data to help effectively populate an app that was launched to better manage flood protection. And so they had hundreds of volunteers use the GPS tool from the app to actually map the flood range. So this has people who have an interest, obviously, they live on the coast, and what they're able to then do is help populate data, help inform the sensing that's taking place, but also get a benefit. So these digital tools are a different way of getting citizens engaged. Next slide, please. And again, on the same line, in a different way, other tools that we cities that we're familiar with and that we use includes firstly this now somewhat a few years old VN Mobile in Vienna, one of the early mobility as a service applications. So if you're not familiar with that term, it's being used to describe the way cities should be thinking about transport rather than thinking about assets, buses, taxis. It's thinking about transport as a service. And so VN Mobile was an early version of an app that integrated all the different ways you can travel around the city, making it easier for people to perhaps find a scooter, use that scooter to get to a bus stop, and maybe then use that bus stop to go to a train if they need 3 tools. Down the bottom, you see a version of what we're doing in some of the Chinese cities where we're familiar with this ride hailing, of course, but the exchange allows other services to be added as a way of boosting engagement. Many of us might be familiar with Amazon or eBay, these markets for products and commodities. This is a way of creating an exchange and increasing engagement of transport. So thinking about a transport marketplace for activity. And then lastly, in the top right is the smart home application in Singapore, where we have an office. And this is an example of the Singapore government trying to find a way to both create a digital tool that can help people manage their homes, the utilities, energy usage, but also safety, because it allows monitoring of individuals who are maybe older or disabled people who need special care. So you could be in your office and you get an app alert that tells you that you left your air conditioning on and you can turn it off, or you can get an app alert just to maybe phone home because a senior citizen perhaps needs help. So these are quite different ways of trying to boost engagement, but also provide data actually to help the planning system, because you can imagine the huge analytics that come from a better network transport system, and similarly the data that comes from energy via the Smart Home app. Next slide. So that's the context for some of what's happening. Is that enough to deal with the roadblocks? Of course it's not. There are other things we have to do. Next slide, please. So the other aspects that city leaders, suppliers, and city practitioners should be doing is making sure that you're helping champion data sharing and open APIs, and where you can, better and freer Wi-Fi. Encouraging what I call vendor or entrepreneur labs. So that can be hackathons, or they can be developed labs, such as the one that ETL has at NUS in Singapore, where you're actually working with ideally citizens and suppliers on solutions. Create a marketplace for these ideas, share the ideas so people can access them. We've talked about the Internet of Things a lot in recent times. We still don't talk about the Internet of Collaboration, although we've had the Internet commercially for 30 years. So we need to think about tools to collaborate more. And lastly, we've got new technologies coming, blockchain. It's a transactional mechanism online, but it can also be used to boost engagement. Next slide, thanks. So for history, of course, if we've worked in cities, this is often what changes look like. City leaders have asked people to put up their hands to vote for things. And actually with the recent digital changes, sometimes in some cities, we've just kind of moved the hand up to a digital form. What we need to do, next slide, is make a big transformational change to what change looks now, where citizens actually have the tools, they have the enabling forces within their hands. They're using tools city provide, but also they're creating tools to boost their engagement as well. Last slide, thanks. So that's the opportunity we have to boost digital engagement by giving applications and tools that citizens want so that they can benefit themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. This is very interesting in terms of the myriad of digital technologies that are available for us to hear the voices of the citizens and for them to participate in so many different ways. Okay, so with that, we are going to move on to the fourth audience poll. So what do you think is the main challenge for cities making community engagement inclusive for women and vulnerable groups? Lack of understanding on how to reach out to women and vulnerable groups, lack of capacity to reach out to women and vulnerable groups, lack of reliable information on women and vulnerable groups, social and cultural barriers for including women and vulnerable. So 5 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see the results. Okay, so social and cultural barriers for including women and vulnerable groups. But I think we also have a good, pretty much equal distribution in terms of what we lack. Okay, so on this point, perhaps we can move on to our last presenter. So I would like to introduce our last speaker of the day, Ms. Christelle Lahoud, who is the Program Management Officer at UN Habitat. Christelle is part of the team responsible for the development of the platform Her City, a digital toolbox that involves women in urban development and aims to create more inclusive, equal, and sustainable cities and communities. Christelle will share more about Her City toolbox. So please take it away, Christelle.
Thank you so much. So can I see the slide? Yes. So you can go to the next one. As you said, Chris, I work for the UN Habitat, which is the United Nations Organization for Human Settlement and Sustainable Urban Development. Specifically, I work for the Public Space Program, which is a program that advanced public space agenda and supports cities to accelerate the progress towards the implementation of the SDGs. So we're looking at, delivering more safe, more inclusive, and more accessible public spaces. Next. And when I say inclusive, it comes with a certain level of engagement. So meaningful engagement, I would like to use that word. So within UN Habitat, we have developed over the years many engagement tools that we use at different levels of the city, from city scale to site level. And we have disseminated those knowledge into normative outputs. And what you see here are most of the tools, they use digital technology, but one in particular was created from the onset as a toolbox that enhances participation in cities, especially for women and girls, which is the Her City that I'm gonna focus on in this presentation. Next. So the Her City platform or toolbox is an initiative done by UN Habitat and the think tank Global Utmaning from Sweden, funded by Vinnova Swedish Innovation Agency. And in the light of the pandemic in 2020, this is how we came up with the idea of digitalizing some of the existing tools that are, in the world. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're looking at at participatory tools that have been applied across the world and digitalize them in a website, basically. So it was launched fairly new last month during the Women International Day, but the tools that are inside the website have been applied widely by UN Habitat across the world. I have to say that in many parts of the world, we work in areas where there's digital divide. So those tools that we are applying, we try as much as possible not to reinforce the digital divide, but use those tools to actually bridge the gap in a democratic and inclusive way. Next. So in a nutshell, like, our vision is to how to better engage those vulnerable groups. We think that if you engage girls in the planning process, you make cities better for everyone, especially that the girls and the women, they think with diversity and different needs in mind. Next. So the toolbox came with the idea to support urban development from a girl's perspective. It guides urban actors to implement projects through a step-by-step approach. It facilitates and bridges the dialogue between professionals and citizens. And more importantly, it provides you with open and digitally accessible tools. So we're not, again, like inventing application, but we're looking at methods that have been used and successfully applied previously. Next. And when I say women and girls, is sometimes a big title. It's a general thing. There are different users as well that are under this category. So we're looking at refugees and minorities, children and youth, persons with disability, LGBTQI community, etc., etc. So if we don't find the right language to communicate with those groups, we risk to have their voices left out. So that's why even in the selection criteria of the tools, we made sure that it's reachable and can accommodate the needs of those different users. Next. So some of the tools that we've selected are already digital, but some of them we had to digitalize them. For example, Method Kit, which is a card value game that is used to brainstorm around the core goals and the values of a public space. Let's say there's Jamboard from Google, Kobo Collect that Ahmad mentioned, Minecraft, and so on and so forth. The important thing about the Her City is not the number of digital tools that are inside, it's how those digital tools fits within a process. Next. So sometimes we see the adoption of a digital tool just in one stage of the project. And I think Mariat already emphasized on that. So for us, it's not just bringing the girls or the women during one, in the validation process. It's actually engaging them from the onset through the different phases of the project, from the assessment, design, until implementation. So in the platform, you get to log in as a facilitator, or you get to log in as a participant, so as the girls. And there are different activities, and in each activity you play a major role, whether in inputting data or like putting your ideas and so on and so forth. Next. So how does it look like from the girls' perspective? In the assessment phase, they are actually taught how to collect data using Kobo Collect that Ahmed mentioned. So they go on the ground in the public space. They are the one gathering the data. It's not the expert. They are gathering information about the physical state, but also more importantly about the perception, which is really hard to capture. So are they feeling safe? Do they feel comfortable? Are they enjoying the public space? And from the data that is gathered by and with them, it is then translated into GIS by the expert to understand how the public spaces performance in the city and where we need to improve. Next. In the second phase, the girls become architects and become the planners. They are given the opportunity to shift their environment. They are given the opportunity to do intervention in the physical space. So they're not just writing down their ideas, but they're actually working in a three-dimensional software, which is Minecraft, the game, to co-create their ideas. After that, they get the opportunity to speak in public in front of the decision makers and explain their models to the wider audience. We call this the use of Minecraft, the block-by-block methodology, and it has been applied widely in Philippines, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And actually this year, we're starting a new project with Kota Kita and Kani Pepe in Indonesia. So we're really excited. Ahmed, you're here. And finally, the implementation phase. I think in this part, it's not just about the girls learning architecture and skill and meeting with the architects, and it's also like the validation of the design, but also that all these tools that we have been using actually come up to an actual implementation. So we're not just doing participation to tick a box. We're not using digital technology to also tick a box that we've done it, but the ultimate goal is to actually have an inclusive implementation, to create an impact, and to scale up. We don't want to bring on girls into the process and raise their hope if there is not actually an action that leads to, all this effort that they have been coming to our workshops or, gathering all this information for nothing. So with that, we see that decision makers also value that engagement, the importance of engagement, as it reflects widely on the management and also on the maintenance of the public space. Like when you engage girls or the community from the onset, they feel ownership of the space. And usually local government express to us that they find that a proper engagement process that involve communities from the onset are usually more active. People come to them more, they're more clean, they're more maintained than the ones without any community engagement. So I just wanted to highlight that the importance of this whole process is actually to lead to something beneficial for the wider city and the community. Next. So I just invite you to visit her city at any time and just go through the tool and the website and the different tools that are there at hercity.unhabitat.org. And if you're interested to have a training, there's one on the 8th of July for Asia. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Christelle. I really think that what you said in terms of people engaging, they really do own the city, and they have to make it more, improvements their own, so that they thrive in where they live and make those improvements. Thank you very much for that presentation. Now, we will move on to the question and answer session now. I think there have been some questions that were sent on the chat box. So we'll start with this question. Okay, the first question from Matt is, how do you get people motivated to use online system? There's a lot of survey fatigue out there. I'm sure our panelists are eager to answer that question. Perhaps we can start with Mark.
Sure, Chris, I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, we need to try and address the fatigue problem, what's driving it. And it's not so much there's lots of surveys. The one thing is we never hear back. How many times have we done a survey and got a response, like actually got the results? It hardly ever happens. So part of encouraging people to participate in the survey has to be you close the loop and you say, we're going to send you back. And Auckland Council uses a device called the People's Panel, and they do a reasonably good job of actually sending back the results of the survey. You may not like them, but at least you get them back. And the other thing to say, Chris, is just, again, think about more meaningful tools. If we're consulting on a cycle wave, for example, sometimes, we go to people who've been cycling on that road for years, and the questions imply people really don't understand. You're not using additional information or additional tools. So make sure that the survey is being crafted from people who understand deeply the specifics that are being surveyed.
Okay, great. So the service needs to be better targeted. I think Marit, would you like to come in to answer the question?
I'm happy to, thank you. I totally agree with Mark's comments, and that the questionnaires and surveys need to be very well targeted, and you need to put a lot of concentration how to create the content and design the content. But how to make the questionnaires appealing, it's also about the visual elements you can add to the questionnaires, and you can also you have to put a lot of attention how to make those sort of visually appealing. I mean, this is like, if you think like how many apps there are available and how people are using digital tools, they don't put attention if the questionnaire looks dull and is boring and too long and you don't understand the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, be relevant and eye-catching as well. So, okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Question number 2 from Christine. How do we include citizens who are technologically challenged? No smartphone, no internet connection, technology inept, etc. Who would like to take that question forward? Perhaps we can start with Ahmed, perhaps. Would you like to? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. In our experience, especially in Indonesia, even in urban area, there has been so many people are not that well kind of connected to technology, right? So in our case, usually we still use an offline mechanisms where we combine with digital and offline, but also in connect with people. In Indonesia, there's a lot of resource for voluntarism. So for example, in our data collection in many slums, we use student. So we kind of, promote kind of voluntarism by students in the university to come to the slum area and then interview using digital tools so they can help the data collection faster. So I think it's still absolute in our context to use the combination between offline and online at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Crystal, maybe you have something to share on this front?
Yeah, I mean, additionally to what Ahmed said, which like some of the tools that we use are offline, like the Kobo Connect, which can be, used there. But the problem is, do they have a smartphone? So this is like kind of the challenging thing. And this is why we rely a lot on our partners on the ground, on some of the community champions that we call them, that are, within the community that have access to those tools, and then they can go and, spread this knowledge across the community. What we see is that sometimes we think of we only need to use digital technology. And I think in some of the cities around the world that we work in, especially in the very poor resource countries, this transition cannot be done abruptly. So there is still a need of merging both non-digital and digital tools, especially at the beginning of the processes in cities where they're not used to those digital technology. So I still feel that there is this need to have both to be able to transition slowly into fully digital engagement processes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to move on for the sake of time. Now, a question from Marisa. How far have the city governments used the digital mapping results in their urban planning policies and initiatives? Who would like to answer that? I think Ahmed, you have.
Yes, I think that question to me, but So far in Indonesian city, the response is quite good, but the problem is to make the sustainability of the data collection in itself in our problem in Indonesian city. So in many cases, our government do not have enough a good resource to continue the process of digital mapping. So this is still problematic in Indonesian context because city government official are not tied to certain expertise. So they usually like a structural model that they use. So they don't really have a dedicated person who can deal with certain kind of technique of urban mapping or this kind of urban planning kind of methodology usage in the city government. So that's our current issues in Indonesian cities right now.
Okay, thank you. Marit? Yes.
Yeah, may I quickly add something? Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of sort of governments using Maption, and what I have seen through these years is that when they first started, it was basically sort of pilot projects they wanted to do, and they were testing the tool and they wanted to learn what's the value of using the tool and gathering this type of experience-based data. And where we are at the moment is that cities really deploy these tools throughout the different departments, and they have kind of put a lot of resources. It's like how to really make the most out of these tools. So what I want to say is that what I see is that first cities test and try, and then when they see the value, they are eager to put more resources on really establishing the services in place. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we do have a couple more questions. So another question from Sarah Lee. In your practices, what would you say is the required enabling environment for applying your digital tools for community engagement, such as digital literacy, ICT, data infrastructure, etc.? So Mark?
Yeah, I can take that one. Look, at the big level, the most enabling thing you need is leadership. Right, so you've got to have somebody within your city world. It doesn't have to be the mayor or the chief executive. It can be a village captain, somebody who's very highly motivated to drive this sort of change. And this relates to another question about, how do you get village leaders on board when they don't want it? Sometimes you need incentives. I mean, we're starting to incentivize people to take electric vehicles, right, because they're expensive. If the tools are expensive, they may need financial incentives. And there's got to be a window, right, where we have to say, actually, by 2021, 22, we're not going to engage in this paper-based anymore. So set some incentives and set some sort of hard sort of end of old world dates.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Christelle?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Mark said, like you need willingness and you need motivation. So it doesn't matter who, I mean, sometimes they're mentioning government capacity, ICT, literacy. Those things can be done through trainings or capacity building programs and so on. It's not that hard to get, but willingness and motivation is really what's missing. And if you have those two people, maybe the chief of the neighborhood, or like a woman who's really passionate and really want to make a change. So with small intervention, a small pilot, it can really show what change could look like, and then it can kind of create this replication effect and kind of scale up. But we have to start small, we have to start from someone, and it takes maybe one person.
Great. Thank you for that. So we have a couple more questions. I don't know whether we have the time to ask all those questions, but let's do one more at least. Question is from Catherine. I would like to hear presenters' thoughts on how to address the issues associated with gender digital divide. What specific measures, ideas do our presenters have to better support the participation of these groups to ensure their voices are heard? I think this is Crystal's. Would you like to take this forward? Or Marit, would you like to begin?
I think, Crystal, you are about to say something. I can say after you. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I'm trying to read the question so I see the points.
Marit, I think you can go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly just say, I wanted to say that when we started, it was like around 15 years ago when we started first at the university, and we did the first BPGI surveys, and we were very surprised because we thought that we would reach younger men with our questionnaires and surveys, and who we reached were actually middle-aged women, and they told us that they are usually, they don't have time to participate public events, and so that they were very happy to find this type of digital tools. So just wanted to share this little story. Okay, go ahead, Crystal.
No, I mean, I don't want to add up to my presentation. I want to say that sometimes we think it's only engaging women and girls, but men play a big role in that. If they're not part of the discussion as well, and if they're not, you know, in the driving seat with us, we are not gonna able to do gender-sensitive cities. Because the reality is, and it's very sad, that most of the decision makers in the world are actually in men position. So let's not forget this, and let's not say always we're advocating for 100% just women participation. We need those men to be on board. We need to also capacitate them, shift the mentality, and just bring them on board in order to deliver on a more gender sensitive cities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for those answers. I know that Mark needs to leave. I think we'll just go on for a couple of minutes, but thank you very much, Mark. If you want to say the last word, no?
Look, I'm so sorry I can't stay because the questions are so terrific, but I think it's a sign that we've got people thinking and talking. So go well, travel everyone, and thank you so much for your time and for the organizers for setting this up.
Thank you,
Stay
Mark.
safe, everyone.
Bye now. So in the meantime, we'll go on with a couple more questions here. So feel free to leave if you need to, but I think we'll just extend by maybe a couple more minutes. So question is on how do we convince village leaders, barangay captains and councils in the Philippines to shift to digital technologies to improve public service provision? Based on experience, there is resistance from some of them, even when the transition to digital solutions using open source apps is offered for free. So who in the audience can, who in the panelists can answer this question? Anyone, any takers?
I can again share one story. I mean, we have done couple of projects where the projects have been very sort of conflicting kinds of. So those have been about the river basin sort of planning, and there have been multiple actors involved. And how we have done it, because there has been a lot of resistance in the sort of among the actors, and how we have then done it is that we have actually engaged the different actors into the making of the questionnaires and tools. So we haven't sort of so they have been already involved into the designing of the questionnaires, and this has been super nice, because then also those people who have been sort of very resistant towards the idea have taken the idea and kind of felt the ownership of the project. So this has helped in many situations that we have experienced.
Okay, great. So Christelle, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Mary just said, like I second that, but I just want to say sometimes we just look at the current government or the current local authorities in place, and, you know, they change every 3-4 years. So you also have, you know, to convince again the new upcoming government of, you know, adopting your tools or adopting your methodology. So I don't see it just like, you know, as in the moment. I see that you also have to do lots of awareness raising, capacity building for, you know, the wider people who are part of the discussion around city processes and planning, just to avoid that whenever a new mayor or a new decision maker is in place, you're not gonna, you know, start from the beginning, basically, all the discussions and the convincing.
Okay, great answers. Okay, so we have another question. So questions are keep on coming in. How do we better screen the credibility of survey entry on a crowdsourcing platform? Ooh, any takers? Maybe Christelle again, do you want to take this question?
I actually wrote to you that I have to leave now because I have a meeting. I'm so sorry, but I'll have to leave.
Okay.
I can leave the chat here and maybe come back to it and answer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation today. Hope to see you some other platform. Yeah, go ahead, Marit.
Chris, can you please repeat the question? I cannot see it, and I missed the question. Sorry.
How do you better screen the credibility of survey entry on a crowdsourcing platform?
Maybe I don't understand fully the question.
Okay.
I mean, especially, well, at least one thing that I can share is that to increase the credibility, you have to also put attention how to market, for example, the questionnaire. How do you, so that, for example, we have some experiences that if the experts behind the questionnaires, if they only market the questionnaire through social media, then of course it violates the results. So you have to put attention how to reach people through different channels. But I'm not sure if that was the kind of correct answer. Sorry.
No problem, no problem. So thank you for that insight. Now I think it's time for us to wrap up. Ahmed, do you have one last something that you would like to share with the audience?
No, I just want to thank you. It was super interesting webinar. Thank you for this possibility.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you. And the questions are so great that we just had to go on. But anyways, I think it's time for us to end. Thank you, everyone, for making this webinar more interesting by posing all those very worthy questions. Now, I would like to thank, on behalf of the organizers, to Ms. Robbins, Marit, Ahmed, Mark, and Christelle for sharing your expertise and insights today. Our webinar series will continue with our next session in May, which will discuss digital payment systems. If you'd like to get invitations and updates about our upcoming sessions, please do sign up on our mailing list. And as mentioned earlier, the slide presentations and webinar recording from this session will be shared with everyone via email a day or two after the webinar. So watch out for that. We also encourage everyone to fill out the webinar evaluation form, which will be greatly helpful to us to understand you, our audience, and improve our upcoming webinars. You should see the QR code and shortened link to the evaluation form on your screen. And finally, the AASCTF is currently running an open innovation challenge, which is focused on finding digital solutions that can help cities to be more livable and build back smarter. These solutions can be focused on improving vulnerable groups' access to urban services and amenities, participation influence in decision-making, or financial access. The winner will be awarded $20,000 in seed funding. So please visit challenges.adb.org for complete information about this challenge. So on behalf of our speakers and our organizing team, thank you so very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to our panelists and all the attendees. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.